Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. It wasn't that long ago that the New York State Legislature was described as the most dysfunctional in the country. But then Andrew Cuomo showed up, brandishing weapons including competence, ruthlessness, and fear to try and cow the unruly beast. The early returns were impressive as he pushed through budgets on time, property tax caps, and the landmark passage of legalizing same-sex marriage that led to national headlines about presidential ambitions, notwithstanding a certain former Secretary of State who might be standing in the way. In the wake of the schoolhouse massacre at Sandy Hook, even state Senate Republicans who might or might not control the chamber, depending on the week, lined up to pass gun control legislation. But since this is Albany, let's not get too carried away. The proverbial image of 3 men in a room, and yes, they have always been men, that worked out all the final details has been changed to 4 or 2.5 men, still men, in the room. While Democrats won 33 of the 63 state Senate seats, that was apparently not enough to control the chamber, as the once 4-member and now 5-member Independent Democratic Caucus stiffed their fellow Democrats to create a two-headed beast in which Republican Dean Skelos presides for 2 weeks and then Democrat Jeff Klein takes the next 2 weeks. Instead of triangulating, now we see rectangulating in Albany. Republicans have been grumbling that they have been getting the short end of the stick in policy debates, and the Conservative Party, long the tail that wagged the Republican dog, is threatening to avenge Republican apostasy in upcoming elections. There are lots of issues on a very aggressive agenda the governor has laid out, including a proposal to raise New York's minimum wage from its current level of $7.25 an hour to $8.75 an hour, which is actually below the $9 level President Obama proposed in his State of the Union. The governor, who also delights in playing various ends against the middle, continues to dither on whether to issue guidelines for hydrofracking, the controversial method of extracting natural gas that lies below upstate's southern tier. We haven't heard much about campaign finance reform and redistricting, campaigned for by the late Mayor Ed Koch. The issue drew widespread support by legislators who immediately ignored it after the 2010 election. When it comes to Albany, the answer to Koch's trademark question, "How am I doing?" appears to be who knows. We are joined by 4 New Yorkers who watch closely the goings-on in Albany and beyond to assess what does this all mean for citizens of the state. Lucia Gomez is executive director of La Fuente, a local political action organization. Cecil Corbin-Mark is the director of policy initiatives at We Act, a West Harlem-based group. Cynthia Doty is a Democratic district leader on Manhattan's West Side, and Richard Flanagan is a professor of political science at the College of Staten Island. Cynthia, since I start with politics and I'm a political junkie, you look at what happened. Democrats seem to have won the state Senate. I mean, how are people in the party reacting? What's going on?
Yeah, it's amazing. We have more Democrats elected. We should be having the majority of the Senate. There are more Democrats registered in New York State than Republicans. The Republicans are actually shrinking, and yet the power is divided. And we have these 5 rogue Democrats who flipped over, and I think for their own personal agendas, wanting their own personal power, have come together in a caucus.
Well, it's actually 6 if you consider Simca Felder.
Simca Felder, right. Yeah, Simca Felder, but he announced early on that he was going to conference with the Republicans. But I think I'm not sure how it's really going to end up playing out. I think what's happened is the governor now has most of the power, really, in Albany. And he actually enjoys having this independent caucus. He could have done a lot more if he had really wanted the Senate Democrats to have the power. When redistricting came up, he could have played a very major role and helped the Democrats win. But he stepped back, and the Republicans redrew the district, so they were able to get elected the ones that were there.
Lucia, Does this matter? I mean, we began talking about the minimum wage, which is an issue that's kind of at the top of the agenda. You work for a lot of progressive causes. You work with a lot of communities that are poor. When you see what's going on in Albany, does it concern you, or does the politics mean maybe there's a chance to make a deal? How do you look at it?
Well, I think it's a total sham and really disingenuous to the actual voters that cast a ballot on election day. The reality is that you go in to run as a Democrat or you run as a Republican and you get elected as such. Then you cut some deals, you take advantage of knowing the rules and the regulations, and then you make up a whole other process that we see now, which is 2 weeks at a time. At the end of the day, the Republicans really took the redistricting process that you mentioned at the start of your comments and turned it into 63 seats. They still couldn't control the state Senate, because that was their entire purpose. You went from 62 seats, let's up it up another district and force the district in an area that we can truly win, and they didn't win. And so while you jam it down our throats for 10 full years to ensure that you stay in power and you still cannot do it, then something should tell some bright-eyed 5 Democrats that get elected that they need to be sincere to the voters that elected them into power and ensure that we sustain an opportunity to pass progressive legislation without having to cut deals with non-progressives and non-individuals that care about these communities that are growing in population, that at the end of the day, the communities that are actually fueling the census population, to ensure that these districts are fair and adequate and represent the communities that are in these districts, are being cheated every step of the way, and now we have 5 Democrats sitting on that aisle, ensuring that their communities are getting cheated every step of the way along with everything.
Cecil Weak began with kind of around issues of environmental racism around the North Riverbank Park sewage treatment plant. We now see the hydrofracking agenda. We now see the hydrofracking issue, which is to some degree an upstate issue, but is really a statewide issue. You sit and look at what's going on up there. Are you encouraged that the kinds of issues you're concerned about are going to get a hearing?
Albany and the words encouraged don't go together, I have to say. It's challenging, and I think that I agree with Lucia and I agree with what Cynthia said in terms of sort of the loss of power. There's a real sense that Democrats won, and we feel much more confident with our agendas around environmental and more progressive issues if we have Democrats in control of the state Senate. I'll give you an example, I think, of where we're going to face challenges moving forward. I mean, when we think about sort of oversight around this fracking issue, I think that a lot of times the Republicans have some challenges with regards to being more pro-business than we might all like. And that's not to say that business shouldn't have an adequate role in sort of the legislative politics of the state. But I think when you're too far in one direction, it poses potential challenges for things like oversight of fracking that will, I think, absolutely have to happen. What the governor does with regards to it obviously will dictate where we go down the line, and we're all waiting to see that. But I do think that this represents some challenges, and I think for environmental issues is going to mean the path to getting legislation passed through the Senate is even a little more complicated. So we'll see at the end of the day.
We're not only political junkies, we're political science junkies. And we do not have a parliamentary system. We're all focused on parties, but we elect people by districts. It's not like, it's not like we have a party list and we just fill in the top 20, the top 20 people. If you looked at state legislatures here and around the country, this is everybody's playing everything against the middle. I mean, it seems to me the governor is kind of in the driver's seat. And Shelley Silver had a great quote. He was talking, I believe it was about the minimum wage, and they were talking about Skello's kind of stopping him. He says, well, I'll just wait 2 weeks and I'll get another majority. So,
Right.
I mean, when you look at this, is this unprecedented? Is it destructive?
Oh, I think that the politics are being played brilliantly by Cuomo, and this is a characteristic of chief executives across the board. And also the hallmark of Cuomo's boss, Bill Clinton, when Cuomo was HUD secretary. You triangulate, you rectangulate, you do whatever you can to get above the legislature and don't get caught in their log rolling politics. and you play it as the sensible one in the middle. And on a lot of policies, Cuomo's been the slice it down the middle guy, and the public's responded to that because his approval ratings are still high. So got to give him a lot of credit on the politics, as much as progressives aren't happy with some of the policies.
But but again, just to kind of bring this back to, talking about the minimum wage, which is kind of the issue that is not only nationally but on a state level. Republican opposition. Republicans were very much opposed to the gun control until Skello said, "Okay, I'm going to give it to you." Republicans were very much opposed on gay marriage until, Skello said, "Okay, you guys do whatever do whatever you need." Is this? Does this confusion actually provide opportunities on issues? I mean, jump in.
I think there's a chance on the minimum wage, except I got a little nervous with the news that came out today about Skellos or Cuomo starting to say, since Obama is putting forth a minimum wage, maybe we'll just wait. But some of the people in the independent caucus won because of minimum wage, too. The minimum wage when we were fighting it, a few years back. So it's hard for them to be opposed to the minimum wage, I think. I think, Klein and Savino, Savino has to be for the minimum wage.
Senator Savino
from Staten Island.
I mean, it's shocking the president didn't write Cuomo a memo to tell him that he would be announcing $9 an hour versus the $8.75 that he had stated in the State of the State. Right? It's kind of shocking that that kind of coordination, which we know very well has existed in the past, didn't exist at this juncture. And now he's able to say, well, you know what, let's wait. Well, wait for what? If the state of New York has been progressive, quote unquote, as the progressive state in the nation, then set the example and pass it at $9 an hour. Go for more if you like.
Except that our minimum wage is much lower than many, many states, including states surrounding us.
Near us, yes.
Our
That's right.
great, we are the great progressive state, but then we have an awful lot of not so progressive policies.
Right, but set
budget
the
speech.
tone, because you can't be the worst of everyone else. I mean, the best of everyone else who's really, really bad, right? So if we're talking about low-income families and an economy that stinks, and yet you're continuing to make money and profit off people making $7.25 an hour, then you know that your best step is making $9 an hour. And if the president already set the tone for it, then you follow through, you pass it as the state of New York, and you set the tone for everyone else.
And I think that on the minimum wage issue, I have less fear about that. I mean, I didn't realize about today's comments, so that does give me pause. But the governor is in a driver's seat, and he has been, and I think with this fractured sort of process, he's even more in a driver's seat. So if that's at the top of his agenda, in his State of the State, that was one of the things that he talked about. I think we're going to get there. I mean, they have run a very disciplined ship. When they set forth something that they want to do, they do it. We haven't been very productive, I think, in terms of getting stuff moved in Albany. I mean, it's been one thing or two things or three things, very few things. But that's not, I think, one of the progressive things that I have the most worry about. But on environmental issues where there hasn't been sort of strong leadership, if we looked at things like getting more money in the Environmental Protection Fund, for example, things that would really help after Sandy like this, I think, that's where I have some more concerns. Obviously, those are things in my sort of policy bailiwick. But on the minimum wage, I actually think that it's going to get something done because it is a part of his agenda.
I'm not sure I agree with Lucia that the president should have coordinated with the governor. I'm not sure if that routinely happens.
Yeah, not at all. And I mean, maybe perhaps it should. Perhaps it should.
Right,
But it was Cuomo coming in right below Obama, right? So he seems as well. I'm liberal, but I'm not crazy liberal. So vote for me in the Iowa caucus, right? I mean, I think much of this is set up to portray himself as a pro-business Democrat with dreams of the White House in mind. And I think everything can be viewed through that prism.
Except for a particular Secretary of State who may be standing.
There might be trouble.
Is definitely running.
Setting aside Cuomo's national ambitions, remember his father had national ambitions, and that plane, he was about to get on a plane in 1992 to go to New Hampshire and file, and I think it was Warren Anderson was the head of the state Senate, who was then Republican, blocked him because he wouldn't do something on the budget. So Cuomo's in particular, and governors in general, have had their national ambitions destroyed by Albany shenanigans. Albany tends to drag you down. I mean, is the governor potentially damaged by having to get down in the muck?
I think, first of all, he's young enough. I think Hillary runs in 2016. She's probably only a one-term, maybe because of age, and he's young enough to still follow her as a presidential candidate in 2020, and so.
Can you believe we're talking about 2020?
Why not?
We got to talk about it every 4 years.
But I'm very excited about.
All people in politics look to the next election. Right?
But I think he is definitely. I mean, when I was in the convention down in North Carolina, in Charlotte, when Cuomo came to speak, they set up our little dining room area in such a way that it was campaign time, and it was they had the press there, and he had balloons everywhere. I mean, this was a big do for Cuomo on the national stage, and so he's definitely interested in the presidency. But I'm not sure that this is going to be. So I think he wants to do whatever he can to be somewhat centrist, somewhat progressive, and to be able to deliver. He has to have a record of delivering budgets, delivering legislation, and keeping national focus. He certainly got it with marriage equality, and he got it with the gun control legislation. Mm-hmm. And so he's billing himself as the leader of the progressive states and a good, solid Democrat.
And now women's equality.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's next. I think, presidential politics, I mean, I think you're right to say, can you believe we're talking about 2020? But I think Cynthia's timeline is probably closer to being more accurate than not. I think presidential politics is about money, and the Clintons are an amazing money machine. You want to talk about triangulating and rectangulating? I mean, I think that a lot of his decisions are going to be very much controlled about how much money gets locked down if Secretary of State Clinton decides she wants to run. And, I think that's a part of this equation as well. And if he can't get above a certain dollar figure, I think the math and the pathway gets a lot more shut down.
One of the reasons that the Independent Democratic Caucus was formed was because of a rather disastrous 2-year period in which Democrats actually controlled the state Senate. And you had Senator Malcolm Smith, and then you had
the coup,
and you had the coup, and you had Senator Sampson. And if I remember my history correctly, it was basically if Sampson won't step aside, we're not caucusing with the Democrats in the state Senate. On the one hand, everybody was congratulating Skelos for a brilliant coup in being able to hold on to the leadership, even though he only has 30 seats. But I get the sense that he is very much behind the 8 ball, because every 2 weeks, Klein can move whatever issue he wants to move.
Right. I think the caucus can swing in and do their thing. And, I've heard Senator Savino gave a little talk at my college a few months ago. And, she argued that the caucus was really important because when the Democrats had control, the advocates on the left jumped in, and they wanted everything at once. And she felt that the caucus would allow
the Independent Democratic Caucus.
Right. Would allow them to control entry of, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, would control entry of progressive interest groups into the circle of trust. And they can kind of pick and choose their projects. Now, so I got that sense that's why the caucus formed, and in other words, it's sort of a suburban, suburban liberals trying to slow it down a little bit.
Suburban white.
Yeah, slow down New York liberals. Yeah, and so what we have now is the Democratic Party becomes the dominant party in the state, and there's hardly any Republicans left. All of the political conflict in the state will move into the Democratic Party and be expressed probably in an urban-suburban dynamic in future decades.
I mean, I cannot ignore the reality that the original members of the caucus were all white. And the shenanigans of the interests and the 2 years of disaster were all under black leadership. Like, I I cannot differentiate the realities of what's being told and what the state of our communities are when this state continues to be less white. And as we talk about less Republican, we are talking about less white. And it becomes more and more communities of color and more new immigrants and more communities that have to be controlled and contained because God forbid they understood what power was about. And so I cannot, I mean, now you have Malcolm Smith. Well, the same person who was part of the shenanigans of 2 years is all of a sudden given some kind of clout and opportunity to make the decisions of get out of here. I mean, like, he all of a sudden adds a tint of color to an all-white party, and all of a sudden he's not as bad anymore because he's under control of four other white people. Like, that's disgusting to me. And in no way, sense or form, like, no one should be happy with that. No one should be clearly anywhere near agreeable that at the end of the day, Cuomo's handling and controlling everything in conjunction with an additional 4 other white people and 1 black person who all of a sudden, you know, was crap before and all of a sudden got a little bit of.
But you know who loves it, right? The Business Alliance.
Yeah,
right,
all
right.
the other
You know,
white
so,
people.
So, but the business interest groups in Albany and New York,
who are mostly white.
They funded Cuomo's, you know, budget campaign quite quietly.
Which was outside his political campaign. It was outside his candidate campaign.
Quite correct, right? And so that moves a lot of the politics in the state, and you know it's very quiet and stealthy, and
Now you have Students First New York, right? That's another core group of people championing charter schools, trying to save
That's kind of more
our public education.
That's actually more of a Bloomberg operation than it is to a degree a state operation.
Well, it's a combination because a lot of those players are all in coordination and funding a Cuomo campaign. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the savior of why our failing schools in the urban districts are all, you know, communities of color, again, and all of a sudden charter schools are going to come save the day to, once again, fill the pockets of people not from our neighborhoods, coming to save poor children.
And I think, I mean, you know, I think the issues of sort of race and the dynamics at the state leadership in terms of legislative politics cannot be glossed over or ignored. I actually think something else, too, about the whole process. There was an opportunity, I think, for the party leadership to sort of clean itself up and clean house in particular ways, and they didn't do that. I think Andrea Stewart-Cousins, actually, who's now the leader, is probably one of the brightest lights in terms of people of color inside that Senate chamber.
Brightest lights in the Senate chamber, period.
Period.
Right.
And I'm really hopeful that, you know, that her ascendancy will mean that the party itself is heading in a new direction, because there's some, I mean, truth be told, there's some mess up there that got taken advantage of by some of the sort of, you know, traditional white power brokership.
However, I must say, you know, having covered politics for many, many years, I will say that when you, that to kind of form some kind of marriage between elected officials of color and progressive politics doesn't always work. I mean, you know, it's politics is more complicated than the color of someone's skin or the nationality that person brings to politics.
But I think actually, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, I think, is actually going to be a very exciting leader because not only does she represent Yonkers, but she also has a little bit of Westchester. And she also knows Jeff Klein, and she knows that community very well. She's come to power very, very quickly. You know, but she didn't come easily because she lost the first time, and then she had to be re-elected. Well, she actually won the first time. I think it was stolen from her in that very close election. But then she did win, and now she's suddenly the leader of the conference. And that's not a small job. I think it's also because she's a woman. It's shaking things up a little bit. It's hard for people to oppose her because she's seen as a change from the old boy network. I'm interested to see.
She's still not in the room.
But I was just going to say, I'm interested to see when they do the women's omnibus bill, the legislation that Cuomo has really touted as one of his big things that he wants to do. Will she be allowed to be at the table at all? Because you know, here she is. She represents women's leadership as well as the Democratic Party. You know,
well, there was a point, I believe, under Governor Spitzer, where they opened up the 3 men in a room to become 5 men.
Exactly.
5 men in a room. Still, it was the minority leader of the Assembly, Republican, and the minority Democratic leader of the Senate.
Right.
But that all, you know, it's like you get a couple of good headlines and then you just go back to doing.
I mean, and then can I
doing
just,
whatever it is.
I think we really need to point out the realities that for a very long time, communities of color in particular, on the electoral side as well, and our first charge for the last 2 decades was to get some representation. You know, drive name recognition, you know, representation, to diversify the all boys network, to diversify the field, to ensure that the electorate was electing candidates of their choice and people that best represented their interests. Now, as we get sophisticated and have an entry into the politics and into an understanding of the game, obviously we get thrown a monkey wrench and the game changes, right? But then because at this point, Andrew would be the majority leader and we would have the first black woman majority leader. But then the game changes because we're not quite sure how to handle the power yet, right? And so at the end of the day, I think the electorate needs to begin to understand that they need to be at the driver's seat of who becomes the majority leader, of who controls the state senate, of who controls the assembly, and stop waiting for the games to change, the rules to be dictated by whoever chooses to be in power, or whoever has the money, hence public finance.
Well, I mean, part of this, is, of course, is we're sitting here in New York City, and we're very parochial and very chauvinist, and we don't necessarily think that much of the world exists north of 242nd Street in the Bronx. And the governor, obviously, needs to take care of communities with extreme need, including the southern tier of New York State. I mean, there's, you know, no place in the country, almost no place in the country, if not no place in the country, has lost population, lost jobs to the degree that upstate is. Whether it's white voters, Catholic voters, black voters. So he's got a lot of attention, and we're very New York centric. So I wonder if you have to be more understanding of his interest, since if in fact he wants to run nationally, he's going to run in something other than a New York City electorate.
I mean, I think he is obviously playing sort of the state politics to sort of put forth his best foot and his best showing, to package himself for the national stage. There's no doubt about it. And I think, you know, in the end, however that plays out, I think there will be some benefit to, you know, different parts of this state that have been suffering for a long time. We work on statewide coalitions on a variety of different issues around toxic chemicals or affordable transit. And when you get outside of New York City, you begin to realize that there is definitely a whole other world out there. I mean, you know, I've been up to Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse, and those are cities. And I know that, you know, there are places outside of those cities within just like 20 minutes drive, and even there the devastation is even worse. So there's no doubt that he is playing it smart when he, for example, you know, restructures Empire State Development Corporation, or he brings out this sort of, you know, regional economic development councils. And they're all, I think, geared towards sort of burnishing an image of someone who's take control of the mess that's gone on in Albany for a long time and redistributing sort of the resources to make all parts of the state better off.
One of the things that's going on in Washington in the Republican House of Representatives, I think it was Speaker Hastert, the last Speaker of the House, developed a rule that said, we don't bring anything to the floor of the House when the Republicans are in control until the Republicans agree, until we all agree, and we're all going to vote as one vote. So the idea of party discipline to a degree that is never really kind of, we haven't seen that. And that's led to the kind of, now as the more right-wing elements take over more and more of the Republican Party, and the blue dog Democrats, the kind of more conservative Democrats, get pushed out, and you have this kind of emptying out of the middle, we have, you know, partisan gridlock that is really destructive. It seems to me, I'm going to go to the political scientist on the panel, that when you have a very small majority, party discipline is more important than it is in the assembly, let's say, where you have 110 out of 150 seats.
Right, harder to maintain.
It's harder to maintain,
yeah.
but it's more important to crack the whip.
If you can, and it's often very difficult to do because parties aren't strong anymore. In the 1960s, the county parties, you know, the assembly members would get orders from or get influence from the county party leadership. Those days are over.
Well, in fact,
right?
in the 1960s, legislators did not have any staff paid for by state taxpayers. Their staff members came from the party.
The district leaders were very powerful in the
That's
60s.
right. As a district leader.
Compared to today. But yeah, the district leaders often did perform the functions of what constituent service staff members do today.
But I think I think you're right. I mean, I think party discipline becomes ever more critical when your majority is razor thin or not present, because let's also realize that the Republicans don't have a majority, which is why this sort of formulation that we have is so interesting, and I think actually is going to make them less relevant despite their discipline as a party as time goes on. Because whenever Klein and Savino and Smith and gang sort of have control of the floor, if they're bringing anything that is remotely connected to the broader Democratic agenda, the Democrats have a majority. If they're bringing it and it comes to the floor, it will pass, right? I mean, that I think is part of the reality.
There's some consensus as to what bill would be presented, though.
They control what bill will come in. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
For those
collectively, Klein and Skelos are supposed to decide what bill.
Right, but of those
Like, they should have a
bills,
consensus.
when Klein is in control and Klein and company are in control, that in essence, I think sort of equals what Shelley Silva was saying. Like, I'll just wait 2 weeks, and
Except you worry about the deals that are being made. That's the part that we don't know. What deal has Skelos been able to make with Klein? And what deal do they all make with Cuomo? I mean, I'm worried about, I think that some of the things Cuomo wants to happen, I think he would like the minimum wage. I think he would like the women's bill to come forward. I think he's then going to do the fracking and allow for fracking permits to happen. But he's nervous about that. So he wants, I'm sure that upstate would like those permits. So the Republican, the GOP, would like to have the fracking permits go through. So one of the deals might very well be that we'll let minimum wage, we'll let the women's bill come through with some tweaking, and then you'll get the fracking permits happening. And I'm worried that that's the deal, because that's going to upset a lot
But
of...
that's what always happens at all. But you have these bizarre package deals at the end that bring together issues that seemingly have absolutely nothing to do with each other. If people want to come over, by the way, and prepare to ask questions, please.
You know what doesn't get discussed in Albany that really bothers me? State administrative reform, legislative oversight over the bureaucracy. The governor launched a very interesting investigation about what some of the salaries at nonprofits from folks who get state contracts. And they were exorbitantly high. And granted, it was a New York Post article. They take the top 10 worst examples. But what it suggested is that this huge complex state bureaucracy with tons of inefficiency and lack of accountability is going more or less unexamined by both the state legislature and the governor, and it should be a much higher priority. And I actually think state taxpayers and citizens would respond to that in a big way. And so I think that's one issue I wish they would take up.
Yeah, and I just want to add real quick that I love the fact that the parties are being debilitated. I love the fact that they're messing around with the infrastructure. I kind of love the fact that, we may be able to get public financing, because I really want to ensure that the public, the voters, are the ones that are making the decisions at the end of the day for the people that best represent them. And I think if that is where this is all going, I think that is a big deal, because we didn't anticipate that there would be control by the Senate Democrats. We didn't anticipate that at all, that they would be able to put that together, considering the state that they were in at that point in time. So I think it's a good approach to debilitate the party, to debilitate the infrastructure that forces there to be like this supermajority and this ultra control, and that we bring it back to the electorate for there to be more competitiveness and more realities of the communities to elect and not elect the individuals that are not best representing their interests. So if that means that those 5 Democrats are the prime targets, the way the Republicans were prime targets for not passing, marriage equality, for voting for marriage equality, then I think the electorate needs to be pissed off that their Democrats are not representing their Democratic interests in Albany, but have to be forced to wait every 2 weeks when that's not what they decided at the polls.
Related to that, the progressives have completely fallen down on questions around. New York State has the worst voting participation rates in the country. And while the progressives are defining an interesting policy agenda, they never talk about that. They never talk about voting by mail and all these other interesting reforms that go on out west. And it's all locked down, shut down, try to pick up that extra seat. And, it turns people off in New York.
Everybody's playing inside baseball and nobody knows how to win.
Let me go to a question over here. Tell us your name, your campus, and speak up, please.
Hello, my name is Mana Sabori. I'm from Queens College, and I would like to ask, will raising the minimum wage make the economy worse?
It's about a 4-hour debate. I mean, the debate is obviously you're raising the wages of the poorest workers, presumably with the theory that they will then turn around and spend that money and lift the economy, especially as its impact on small business, although a lot of very big businesses pay the minimum wage. Will that raise their costs so much that they will simply cut overall employment?
It will make the economy worse, but it may be worth it because it lifts the fortunes of people at the bottom. But yeah, it's a trade-off. I mean, raising the minimum wage in a market cuts down, increases the price of labor.
I really cannot see where it can make it worse. In all disagreement. At the end of the day, these same families are fueling the economy with their expenditures. Folks are not saving and hoarding money the same way businesses are, and investments and bad investments, and then we have to eat it. At the end of the day, when you raise, when we're talking about raising the MetroCard expenses, when we're talking about, the fare hikes, when we're talking about tolls being raised extraordinarily across boroughs, we're paying this.
I don't think the labor expense is really the biggest problem for businesses. Right? I think that, and I think there have been a lot of studies saying that it doesn't really hurt the economy. I think the Republicans would like us to think that it hurts the economy, and big business would like that. Actually, it's probably not even big business, it's small business that would say that. But no, I think that in order to really survive as an employee, especially in New York City, you have to have a higher income. To have people do 3 and 4 jobs in order to even, be able to pay the basics. We have a huge percentage of people in New York City as well as in the country who are below poverty, and they're not contributing to the economy. So if you can give them this extra boost, they spend it at the grocery store, they spend it at the shoe store, on rent, and they can continue to, and they're not spending it, they won't have to spend it on food stamps. They won't have to spend it on as many other governmental services. So I think it's actually a boost to the economy, and it's happening gradually. It's not happening like, all of a sudden they're going to have to pay this huge, a small business isn't suddenly going to have to pay a huge increase in their wages. Let
me also suggest to you, I don't want to get into this discussion now, but one of the kind of progressive Republican, that actually is a legitimate term, progressive Republican points of view is rather than raising the minimum wage to expand the earned income tax credit, which is kind of a negative income tax that helps working people. So you may want to look some of that stuff up in your research, but I'm frankly not expert enough in it to even sound that intelligent. Yes.
I'm Jesse Williams. I'm from John Jay College, and my question has to do with the disenfranchised voters. What does it say about these 6 rogue Democrats and the way that they feel about their constituents? 6, right? And what can be done to, maybe make the districts more competitive? Because as a formerly disenfranchised voter, having the ability to vote, I think, you should really have your voice heard by the larger government.
Let me make a point about that. We have 19 million people in New York, and the power of map making is that you can cut up those 19 people to create a 65-seat Democratic majority in the state assembly, and an evenly split, for many years, even though now but an evenly split state Senate chamber. Just shows how creative you can be with maps. on a national level, Democrats got more votes for Congress than Republicans did, but because of the way the seats were drawn, the Republicans were able to win more seats. You know, God bless the memory of Ed Koch. This was his last great campaign, was to try to shame people in Albany into accepting independent redistricting. They all signed the pledge, and it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. So,
Right. I mean, and we have to live with this now for 10 years.
That's right.
So unfortunately, it would be great if, in fact, we did draw the map more fairly. But we had to go at it, and it didn't happen. So now we have to live for 10 years with this. And the big question mark is going to be 2 years from now, when we have elections, those 5, and Simcha Felder, the 6th, those rogue Democrats, will they suffer any consequences? I'm not sure that they will. A lot will depend upon what actually happens, but they are in kind of safe seats.
Right.
And they're kind of popular.
Well, because they were carved for them, right?
Right,
I mean,
carved for
they
them.
were in on the deals when
Exactly.
the districts were being drawn, a good number of them. And even in the mid-Hudson, even in areas where you can't go competitive, like New York City, because the 2-to-1 in terms of Democrats, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, over Republicans is incredible. At the end of the day, you have districts in Long Island that should have more of competitiveness and make them more solid, and no one pays attention to that. So I think that, yes, I believe solid, good candidates that are committed to the electorate should run against those candidates that have decided not to be with their electorate and not to allow them to have a real
Let me
voice in
defend the caucus a little bit, because I don't think they're rogue at all, because the voters can revisit the decision they made very soon with 2-year cycles. And in addition, they're actually in step with their districts. And I would say, well, what isn't carved out? The whole thing's an incumbency protection racket, and up and down the line. And then maybe an argument for independent reapportionment.
Yeah.
So on the contrary, I don't think they're rogue at all. And if they are, then I'm sure some politician in the district is sharpening their knife.
I think the issue is really about independent redistricting. I really do. Because I think Simcha Felder is probably the best example of this. If Simcha Felder were to sort of walk over and say, I want to become a Republican tomorrow, I think his district would still reelect him. I think that district overwhelmingly said that, you know what, these folks voted for marriage equality, and we don't want to be associated with that. And I think that for that district, then what are we talking about, disenfranchising those voters? I think the issue goes squarely back to where Cynthia started, which is that we need independent redistricting, and we need to take these guys and gals out of the process of ensuring a seat for life. I think it has to be something like that.
Keep in mind, it hasn't solved a lot. I mean,
Yeah, I would.
It's
Yeah.
not
It's got to
the
be a different
Holy
pathway
Grail.
than the way that we
mean,
have.
I
I
think
agree
the
it's not the
I-
Holy Grail, but
mean,
it's got to be different than
And
what
the
we've
governor
got now.
tried instituting some kind of by committee, some kind of form process, that we'll supposedly see in the next cycle. But I think you're right. I mean, I think independent redistricting was something that was trying to be heard. And I think some of the opposition on independent redistricting was the reality that who really is independent?
they always said that the only way you leave the legislature is by
it.
indictment,
Death or indictment.
death, or becoming a judge. Those are the only 3 ways you ever lose your seat. Yes.
Hello, my name is Stephen Kaplan. I'm a student at Queens College, and I'd just like to ask, do you believe that this general voter apathy is just further proof that we should just move away from the big government type of viewpoint that a lot of people have been pushing these last couple of years?
Well, I mean, I guess it's selective as to who's been pushing it. I mean, I would agree that in terms of New York City,
Every politician in a
pick
city and state is committed to not preventing you from voting. I mean, that's clear. New York State has the worst voter laws in the entire country. So on that level, yeah, I agree.
But I'm not sure that I follow the train of thought around voter apathy and big government. First of all, this whole notion about big government, I think, is very much a sort of more conservative talking point than a reality. I mean, when we talk about the importance of government, the yellow line down the middle of the street that keeps cars from bouncing into each other, that's government. The air traffic controllers, that's government, and all of those services are really important, yet we sort of talk about this idea of making government smaller when, as a society, our needs are more complex than they have ever been. And where do those critical sort of central functions in the sort of greater public domain, go when we are constantly pushing government to be smaller, quote unquote? They go into places like privatizing parks. I heard of a story in California where this one wealthy person, a state park in California was going to be closed permanently. And this one wealthy person stepped in and said, okay, I'll put up the money for it. But there were no rules around what that money could or could not control. So ultimately, at some point, we might end up in a place where, for the sake of small government, we are actually saying we can, to the highest bidder, have all of our public stuff, and they can control what the rules are. If that guy wanted to close the park, he could close the park.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Katerina Matic, and I come from Queens College. My question is, do you think that increasing minimum wage to $9 and giving that extra $1.75 would have a negative impact on middle and poor class, since it is a sort of a game? We give you something, you have to give something in return. So do you think that it would bounce back to them in some negative way?
Once again, one of the aspects of raising the minimum wage is presumably people would spend more money, people would be spending more would be raising more sales tax. I mean, there is a rising tide lifts all boats argument, as opposed to the kind of as opposed to the supply side theory of cut taxes on the richest people and they will lift people up. So it's kind of a basic Democratic Republican philosophical distinction. Minimum wage kind of crystallizes a lot of those distinctions.
I think it's actually, it should be a stepping stone into the middle class. And I mean, rather than keeping people permanently poor, I think the minimum wage is a help. I think it immediately impacts the neighborhood small businesses. I mean, that's the first thing that it immediately impacts. And those small businesses might be, a McDonald's or, a franchise like that, but it's still a neighborhood business. That's the first place where the money goes. And those are usually middle-class people. Most of the small businesses, the neighborhood stores, are, mom and pop stores who are in the middle class. So if they have more customers, it means, their business does better. And then, as you were saying, the employee pays more taxes, and the taxes go into the services for the city and for the state. So I think it's actually, in the big picture, it does raise the economy and the middle class.
I want to try to get a couple of more questions in, please.
My name is Stephanie Choches. I come from Baruch College, and my question is, what do the Republicans have to do, or better yet, change, in order to come back in power in the state Senate?
We're not giving them any advice.
Well, first of all, they have half the power, at least, in the state Senate, right? In the state Senate right now. I mean, you traditionally had, setting aside upstate, you traditionally had a Republican Party that was essentially suburban versus a Democratic Party that was essentially New York City based. I don't mean to disregard every other part of the state, but that was the major collision, and you saw it come kind of to fruition, especially around education aid, where more education aid went to suburban counties than went to New York City, proportionally. So I think that this is a power play. It's less about ideas than it is about a power play.
And people in power screw up, right? So we had a stretch there with Governor Spitzer and getting caught with a prostitute, and and then handing over the reins to, I think, sometimes an unfairly judged Governor Patterson. But nonetheless, that extended that sort of gave the Republicans a new lease on life for a while. So when parties in power screw up, which they inevitably do, minor parties can capitalize on that and take advantage. One
thing, I just wanted to add one little thing about the discipline. I think the Democratic conference has learned some lessons over the last 4 years, and I think we're going to see them become much more disciplined. At least that's what they're saying. We'll see how it plays out.
Discipline and Democrats don't usually work together very
But I
well.
think they realize that in order to really influence the independent caucus and the governor, they have to be more disciplined. And I think we're going to see that they're going to, those 2 weeks when Klein is in charge, I think there's going to be some definite maneuvering going on by a disciplined Democratic conference. And I think their plans for re-election are going to now be much more focused. I think they're going to try to win some vulnerable Republican seats. I'm not sure where they are, but I think that's what they're going to shoot
I remember Herbie Berman was one of my favorite councilmen who I covered when I covered City Hall, who said parochialism in pursuit of re-election is no vice.
And they have, I would say, another decade before the next redistricting cycle, 2 years before that cycle kicks in, so they can hurry up and get in the majority and then rig the system again during the redrawing of the district lines. So
Well, maybe the question is who rigs it? That if
Yeah.
people you agreed with rigged it, we might not be having
right.
this discussion.
they
Yes,
could have
sir.
changed
My
it
name
too.
is Daniel Landau, and I go to Queens College as well. My question is, do you believe that part of the governor's plan to raising the minimum wage to $8.75 would be a part of a long-term plan to eliminate food stamps and welfare?
No. I think that I can't imagine that $8.75 or $9 is going to take you anywhere near the poverty level. So, and those are kind of income-based, and and those are also set by federal. Most of that is set by federal standards. So, no, I don't. Does anybody else want to jump in or?
Yeah, my name is Johan Garcia from Hunter College. My question is to the panelists: what are the chances for the New York State Dream Act this year, now that the legislature power has been divided between the Scalos and Senator Klein? And now that the immigration reform is such a big topic at the national level.
I think the governor really wants it. That was one of the things he talked about. And I think there's a possibility that that will happen. But again, it's what's the trade-off? And I'm worried about, what the Republicans will get in return for that.
Well, I don't think the governor didn't speak about the DREAM Act. He spoke about the DREAM Fund, which is a different piece, of which, recently Scalos has talked about being, in favor of private corporate funds going into this fund that would essentially provide aid to
It's for the education, right?
but not tuition aid, which is what the DREAM Act is about, which Cuomo hasn't come out in favor of. Klein did in his opening statements of the state of the state. And, we still don't know whether that is even part of the positive agenda, because I haven't heard Klein repeat the DREAM Act, even though we did hear from a Crane's business, meeting that he had recently at breakfast with Klein, that they were talking with Scalos, that they were talking about the DREAM Fund.
Right.
But that's
I'm glad that Lucia made that correction, because I think it's really an important distinction. But the one thing I want to say in response to the question, first of all, yay, Hunter. I was like, I was waiting for a Hunter. I'm a Hunter grad. So I think that with the national organizing that's going on around immigration that's coming, and this organizing that's going on here in New York State around that, I think that a lot of that can also translate in state to applying pressure to the legislators. I think Cuomo can be moved on those types of things, and I think it is another important piece that he has to be thinking about as he thinks about how to frame up his sort of national run picture.
But I also think that immigration. You see the Republicans learning how to read election returns, in which they lost 70% of the Hispanic vote around the country. They even lost the Cuban vote, which had been traditionally a more conservative Republican vote, and kind of moving to the middle as fast as they can. That the people who are against immigration reform are kind of outliers in the Republican Party now. Our Republicans would be way left of center. Our most conservative Republicans in New York would be way left of center in the Republican Party nationally. So we are still a strange beast compared to the rest. So I think this is one of the easiest issues. Doesn't mean they don't have to be pushed.
I really wish that we could say that about, Congressman King, right? Or Grimm in Staten Island, I really hope that is the case.
But we're talking about the state, right? But no, well, even they, I don't know so much about Grimm, but even King is kind of, more moderate. You have seen the middle emptied out in both parties. So I don't want to overplay this. But let me try to get another question in. I'm sorry.
Hi, Jennifer Gonzalez from Baruch College. Concerning the minimum wage again, how do you believe that Governor Cuomo will somehow pivot the issue of minimum wage now that the president mentioned it in his State of the Union speech, other than taking out that piece from the budget proposal?
And another way of asking that question is how much political capital is Governor Cuomo willing to invest to get this? I think that the president outbid him at $9. It's kind of embarrassed the governor, and the governor's going to have to come up to $9. But the question is how much. We know that when he does invest political capital, he can be very effective.
Well, Assembly Carl Hasty just proposed the $9.
But I mean,
with indexing.
But
how
how
he
much?
didn't just say $9. He said with indexing.
Right.
So we don't have to revisit this again and see who's in the majority and go through this whole process again. But it will take all these elements into
But I
consideration.
mean,
I'm not sure it's going to pass in Congress. So
we're talking about Albany. Right?
I know, but so I'm saying, so Cuomo can still be the leader. New York can be the progressive leader of the country by having it pass. So he has to figure out a way to get back on top of it, having been undercut a little by the president. But I don't think it's going to pass in Washington. So I think the chances of it happening in New York become even better. So he can say he did this.
And if he's going to go by polls, right, as the most popular governor of all time, then the polls indicate that both Republicans and Democrats support minimum wage.
Right.
I'm getting the goodbye sign. I always make deadline. I want to thank you for a spirited discussion. We'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.